Rocksteady's back, Goldie Roger, a scary banana, and the merciless slaughter of 100,000 people. So much to look forward to in this chapter, and it begins on an exceptionally mind-blowing note. Last week on Fictional Pirates, we learned that Rox and Blackbeard were members of the Davy clan, and in fact we learned that there was a Davy clan. And this week we are introduced to more members of the Will of D than we have ever seen on page at the same time in all of the history of One Piece, and they are all members of the Davy clan, which means that the Monkey family and the Nefertari family, who currently have 3 Ds apiece, are no longer our largest D families. We're introduced to almost as many Ds in this chapter alone than we have met in the last 28 years combined. And it's hard to tell exactly how many of them there are, but I think I see 8, including Teach and his mother, and it's so surreal to see them on stage like this, as these soon-to-be slaughtered characters are subject to the same winds of fate that guide the likes of Luffy and Roger. And I'm thinking that there could be a very painful chapter coming up, a chapter filled with pain but filled with smiles, as each and every member except for Teach is killed, but all of them could die with those trademark Will of D smiles. And just on Teach, Blackbeard's mother, she's not what I was expecting. She's much more of a standard Oda character than I was thinking. I guess Oda had a choice between the Nami template and the Robin template, and what he chose was the Robin template. But what's more unexpected is that her hair in this chapter looks weirdly similar to Rox's hair. So what, are they siblings? Because none of the other Davies seem to have this hair. And so I laughed to myself about incest for a bit before I had a pretty horrific thought, which is, what if the world nobles found out that she was Rox's wife and they gave her this hair for their amusement? Because she does look pretty bloodied and beaten. She certainly hasn't been kept in the pristine condition that Shaki was. I'm not sure though, because if the world nobles did know about this Rox connection, then they may have anticipated his invasion, but they do seem to have been caught off guard. So I suppose Blackbeard's mother's hair is just naturally like Rox's hair, and at the point of functional distinction, maybe you just don't have a lot of diversity of mates to choose from. But after seeing Blackbeard's mother, you would not be blamed for expecting to see Shanks's mother as well. But we don't. Well, we do. We see her from behind and we see her hand on the ground after she dies. And I think that Oda has chosen to do this to reflect the experience of the respective children. Shanks, he's still a baby at this point, and so he would have no memories of his mother. So this event gives us a semi-POV experience from Shanks, who may have only ever heard of his mother but never seen her. Meanwhile, Blackbeard was old enough to remember his mother during the God Valley incident, which is why we do get to see her very Nico Robin-esque face. It's a sickeningly good decision because it gives you 2 different flavors of the same tragedy, the known mother and the unknown mother. All we know about Shanks' mother is that she had red hair, and that may be why Shanks decided to name his crew the Red Hair Pirates, to proudly carry on what little he could of her. Weirdly enough though, the revelation of Blackbeard's mother isn't even the most eye-catching part of that page. That award belongs to this member of the Davy clan showcased in the bottom right, because this dude is flat out wearing a straw hat, and look at the size of the guy. He is massive. And what I immediately thought of was that huge straw hat that Imu has stored in Marijois. There's lots of speculation that that hat belonged to Joy Boy, but we have since learned that Joy Boy was a regular-sized human, or at least that's how he appears in silhouette. But if Imu does end up on Elbaf via Gunko, then he may see this straw hat, recognize its symbology, and take it from the future corpse of this currently living man as a trophy. Or just to make sure that this straw hat doesn't get passed down, an attempt to eradicate one thread within the Will of D. As in, there could have been multiple straw hats passed down from the Void Century, and it's been Imu's desire to eradicate each and every one of them because they contain this willsome power. But I also say this because there is quite a popular theory that Imu took a trophy from Rox as well. In chapter 908, where we first see Imu, and I guess where we first see Gunko in retrospect, that's fun. But there is a sword between the 2 of them in the center of the Chamber of Flowers. A sword that is rather rudely skewering the face of Shirahoshi after having chopped up both Luffy and Blackbeard's bounties. And I've been seeing several people speculate that this is Rox's sword. And I think that's a fairly strong idea, as in chapter 1155, we see Imu and Gunko standing in the exact same spot about half a century ago, and there is no sword present at this time. So upon Rox's defeat, Emu may have taken it for the same reason that he ended up with that giant straw hat. And just for some clarification, when the spoilers for this chapter were leaked on the internet, the leakers stated as a fact that the Davy clan members are buccaneers, seemingly confirming Blackbeard as a buccaneer, which had people going insane in good and bad ways. But this is why you need to be very careful with leaks, and honestly why you should try to avoid them at all costs, because that turned out to be blatantly false. It's just a random world noble in the crowd accusing the Davy clan of being buccaneers. And hey, you know what? Maybe the two big dudes are. The guy in the straw hat especially does look like he could be a buccaneer, but this wasn't anything close to Blackbeard being a buccaneer, and I just thought I'd put that out there because I know that there are people who watch these videos and for whatever reason don't read the chapters. They just follow spoilers on Twitter and Reddit. So if that sounds like you, then this clarification was just for you. But for everyone else, I've got something for you too, as this video is sponsored by Azure Lane. Azure Lane is a free-to-play naval warfare game where players collect anthropomorphic World War II warships known as shipgirls, who you command and combine into a flotilla to break through enemy gunfire in a wildly satisfying side-scrolling shoot-'em-up experience, which you can either control manually or set to AI controlled. There's a surprising, engaging story to follow, all culminating in unlocking the endgame Operation Siren. But look, let's get to serious business. This game features a truly colossal cast of shipgirls to collect, and I didn't know this before I started playing Azure Lane, but apparently yes, there is a World War II naval vessel to suit everyone's taste. You can participate in the limited construction pool to acquire new shipgirls, with two of the newest being the ultra-rare Hakuho, as well as the super-rare Omi, both featuring stunning live 2D animations where you can interact with your shipgirls when not engaged in glorious battle combat. Although one of my personal favorites has to be the Russian battleship Sovietsky Soyuz. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm probably not. Doesn't matter because look at her. So you can and should download Azure Lane through my link in the description. It's the most fun I've had with anthropomorphic anime girl warships in ever, so definitely check it out. But for now, it's back to you, me. But mates, this chapter, it is pretty rough. There's some incredible hype in the second half of the chapter with the Rogers, the Roxes, the Dragons, and the Garps, and I guess what are now known officially as the Knights of God. But mate, I feel like we need to climb over such a high mountain of bodies to get there. In addition to recounting the events of God Valley, this chapter had the very difficult mission of portraying the birth of the revolutionary dragon. We spend quite a bit of this chapter in his perspective, and for this to work, Odin needed to draw a series of events so thoroughly disgusting that it radicalizes us as readers into Dragon's cause. And One Piece has done some pretty putrid stuff in the past. Spandam, for example, is often cited as one of the most hated characters in the series due to the sheer and unnecessary brutality that he inflicted on Robin. But what happens in this chapter almost makes those scenes look comical by comparison. And I think the part that stands out most to me is where Saint Summers is kicking a child down from a tree, with the child screaming for his father as he falls, and the whole time Summers has this look on his face like he's at an amusement park. This is such a magnificent day out for him. What fun! But this right here, this is very classic Saint Summers. The father of the child is running and ready to sacrifice himself because actually I didn't even mention the most fun part yet. Summers has conjured thorns at the bottom of this tree to cushion the child's fall. How very considerate of him. So Summers is kicking the child down in the hopes that the father will throw himself on the spikes to save his child, which I believe he does. And this is the Saint Summers philosophy of love that he's currently displaying on Elbaf, wrapping the kids up in spikes so that he can relish the moments when the parents rip themselves apart trying to save their children that they love. Look, I don't know how Summers is going to be beaten on Elbaf, but whatever happens, it probably isn't going to be enough. There's also another part of the chapter that shocked me a bit more than any world noble behavior, which was a quick shot of the Marines on God Valley discussing how lucky Garling is to have or to be about to have a wife as beautiful as Shaki. If these were world nobles, I'd get it. She's the top prize in this contest after all. Every world noble wants her for their own personal reasons. But these are not world nobles. These are Marines. They are regular human people, and let's be generous and say they do not know about the native hunting contest right now, which I do believe. I think that some of the higher ranking Marine officers are aware of what's happening, and they're keeping that as hidden as possible from the the enlisted men. So let's say they don't know about all of the murders being committed, fine. But they surely know that Shaki isn't here of her own free will, because they do seem to understand the nature of her as a prize to be won. And I guess it's just pretty startling because the low-ranking Marines of One Piece, honestly, they're usually pretty good dudes. They're just doing what they think is the right thing to do for the sake of justice and peace, and they're usually very unaware of who they're working for or what they're working towards. And even with stuff like Ohara, there was still the justification that the scholars were evil and that their research was threatening the stability of the very planet. But with God Valley, no one's even tried to come up with an excuse for it. If I'm a Marine, I don't know why I just tranked 100,000 people, and no one except Dragon is even asking why. And that's the part that becomes harder and harder to pass as the chapter goes on, as we are treated to a lengthy degustation of horrors. There's all sorts of wild things happening here. In the shot of all the rabbits running away, there is a guy pushing his elderly father in a wheelchair, which is heartbreaking. We also see a gun being pointed at a baby's head, followed by a cut to shots being fired. And then we see Gunko murdering 3 whole people with her arrows. And all of this must be viewed with the full context of the native hunting contest. In this chapter, the MC announced that there were 13 super rare rabbits as well as 150 rare rabbits, but God Valley had a population of over 100,000 people. So the handful of people that we did see die in this chapter account for about 0.0001% of the massacre taking place. And you would need to multiply the damage done in this chapter by about 10,000 to feel the full extent of what's happening here. And putting it like that, I think that Oda was extremely successful in having us empathize with Dragon's cause. And I love that in this chapter, Dragon does start to make a difference in this world, particularly when a world noble stumbles upon a group of children to murder, which includes the very familiar faces of Kuma, Ginny, and the face himself, Mr. Emporio Ivankov. And despite the potential child murder, this was actually quite a cool part of the chapter, because we're watching the same scene that played out in chapter 1096 from a different perspective. This is where Ivankov is giving his iconic, "Is this real life or is this hell?" speech, and apparently things could have turned out pretty badly here, because there was a world noble preparing to fire at this very moment. But that world noble, he was shot by Dragon instead. And by acting, Dragon has just saved the future of Bartholomew Kuma, which is quite sweet because years later, Kuma would read about Dragon in the World Economic Journal and comment that, and I quote, "He's so cool. He must be someone's hero, I bet." And yeah, he is. It turns out that Dragon was Kuma's hero without Kuma even knowing, which is a very much needed source of hope in this very blood-soaked chapter. Because Dragon is implementing change. He is doing what he believes is right, and he doesn't even know it, but by shooting this world noble with a tranquilizer gun, he has just saved his own son several times over, as Kuma and Ivankov are 2 of Luffy's most essential allies. Dragon is changing history, or he's changing the future, which to us is history because it happened 2 years ago. Or well, it happened to them 2 years ago, in world that is. To us, in the real world, Sabadi impelled down in Marineford happened about 18 years ago. But this is such a powerful scene because Oda is showing the impact that one man can have on the future, and emphasizing that even when you feel powerless and the situation seems completely hopeless, you can still make a big difference. That difference may not feel immediate, but it has snowball effects that build over time. And I don't know if it's too early to do this, but I'm of the mind that Garp's hero title should be revoked and given to Dragon instead. I don't know, we'll see if Garp goes on to earn it, but right now, Dragon is the only hero that I'm seeing on God Valley. And I'd also be a fool not to mention Dragon's parallel to Luffy here, or actually vice versa. Dragon is 17 years old when he made this decision to harm a world noble, and to commit what is legally the worst crime one can commit in this world, and 17 happened to be the exact same age that Luffy was when he made the same decision by punching St. Charles. Compare confis, as the French may or may not say. But I look at all of this Dragon stuff and it just has me thinking, Dragon these days, he is such a hardened man. In this chapter, he's incredibly emotional, but in the modern day, it's like he's not even capable of expressing emotion. The closest I can really recall was Luffy's flashback when Sabo said that he was ashamed to have been born as an aristocrat, and Dragon discovered yet a new low that the nobles of this world could reach. To think that their depravity could have this effect on a child of their own. Other than that though, he's probably so neutral because he's just seen too much. God Valley is the first of many horrific events that Dragon would witness, and after a point, I have to imagine that it just stops being shocking. And at the same time, Dragon has also seen so much by the modern day of One Piece that it has to be next to impossible to feel emotions like a regular regular human being ever again. But in a statement I never thought I'd make, our heroes may be the Rocks Pirates and arrive on God Valley in an amazing 2-page spread, which I believe takes place just before the group shot of them that we saw in chapter 1096. Rocks even has the same line of dialogue as he jumps off the ship. We didn't actually see Rocks in the previous flashback, but we did hear him say this line. And after seeing everything that happened in the first half of this chapter, I'm amazingly relieved. Relieved to see some of the greatest antagonists this series has ever known, characters that I have hated at times. Because at the very least, what I want most right now is to unleash these guys on the world nobles. And they're all still discussing Shaki, but it is noted that Ochoku chose to stay behind on Hachinosu, probably a wise decision for him, and his ultimate control of Hachinosu now makes a lot more sense. As when the Rocks Pirates are shortly defeated and disbanded, he would be the natural person to inherit the island as the last remaining representative of the Rocks Pirates. I really love how this played out though, as Oda has meticulously crafted these pieces to fit together so perfectly, because it is the arrival of the Rocks Pirates that gives Dragon the much needed opportunity he needs to abscond with baby Shanks and baby Shamrock, who as always look ridiculously adorable. And I'm quite surprised that Dragon managed to get both of them, and also slightly afraid of what that means about what's to come in the next chapter, because I imagine that this will lead to some sort of showdown with Garling, who doesn't want his children stolen, which does make me fear for Dragon, because we are so early on in his life that there is no way he has the strength to stand up to Garling. And just a note on Shamrock, I wonder if in the modern day, Dragon feels some sense of personal responsibility for Shamrock. Does Dragon blame himself for Shamrock growing up to become the man he is because he failed to save him? I don't know, we'll have to see how things actually play out. Rocks gave Dragon the opportunity to grab the babies, but it is Roger's arrival that ultimately allows Dragon to save Shanks. The Roger Pirates are a brief yet fantastic part of this chapter, and you can tell that this flashback is Rock-centric because the Rocks Pirates, they get 2 whole pages, whilst the Roger Pirates only have 1, and it definitely makes Roger's crew look much less narratively relevant. I love that Roger gave his speech about Shaki only to then be trampled by his entire crew who are more fired up than he is. It's a small moment of comedy, but something that a chapter like this very much needs, that bit of breathing space. Because One Piece is never 100% drama, action, or comedy, it's always a mixture. The ratio of each changes chapter by chapter, but the elements never disappear entirely. It's also great to see Roger getting trampled because it's a very Luffy-like thing to happen to him. I could see this exact scenario playing out with the Straw Hats if, say, Vivi were being held captive. Luffy would make some dramatic speech about saving her, only for everyone else to have already taken off to do it. And it's always nice when Oda isn't too precious with his characters, especially the more legendary figures, and stuff like this for me adds a lot of depth to Roger, just showing how much fun his crew was to be a part of, and how they were very much the Straw Hats of their day. But we do still have 2 more groups to mobilize, and ever since these guys were introduced, there's been a mild argument in the online fan base about whether to call them the Holy Knights, which is the official translation, or the God's Knights, which is what the fan translations went with, and it turns out it is neither, with Oda giving the official English name as the Knights of God, which I will admit is a bit clunkier than either of the other 2, but I guess it is what it is. And we have a pretty fantastic group shot of them. But before we get into the members we can see, I should note that I was expecting to see a slightly bigger group, and that's due to the fact that 2 of the Knights of God featured in chapter 1096 appear to be missing. In Kuma's flashback, we also saw a dude with a gas mask and a woman, maybe boy, with an Elizabethan ruff, neither of whom are in this chapter, but I imagine that they're elsewhere on the island. But the group that we do see obviously includes the familiar and detestable faces of Figland Garling and St. Summers, but also we have our girl in the puffy hat. I'd say she was unnamed, but that's only half true. We know that she is a member of the Manmare family, but we also have a better look at the other lady we saw in chapter 1096, as well as the deer head skull guy from that same chapter. All 3 of those characters, they're going to remain enigmas for now, but probably the most interesting part of this group shot is a new addition, a huge horned woman who looks a lot like St. Gillingham, and I would probably bet on this being Gillingham's mother. And other than her, we also have this here big boy who could be just about anything. He's got oni horns, but more of a fishman-like mouth. In fact, his face in general reminds me a lot of Tom. The Knights of God are definitely much more diverse than I thought they'd be, especially with 2 of them having horns, 3 if you count the dude with the deer skull. And these members are probably not traditional world nobles and were likely recruited into the Knights of God in the same way that Shamrock and Gunko tried to recruit Loki, offering him that elevation of status in exchange for his service. But the last part of this chapter is definitely my favorite, as Garp has been a pretty integral element that's gotten a bit lost in this Loki, Harold Rock, Shacky Dragon flashback. But he arrives onto God Valley in superb style, and what I love most about his entrance isn't even the glorious shot of him on the last page, it is the reaction of Roger and Rox as they discover that Mr. Garp has arrived. The sheer amount of aura Garp gains by making these 2 men stop what they're doing to take serious note of his presence is incalculable. And just think about it this way. The entirety of the Rox pirates show up, then the entirety of the Roger pirates show up, and then Garp turns up, and he alone makes the same impact as both of their whole crews. With Bogard here to back him up, of course, we're not going to erase him like the world government's going to erase God Valley. But overall, I am so glad that Oda doesn't appear to be rushing through this incident. I was honestly pretty worried that God Valley was going to be over in a single chapter, but I think that Oda's pacing this quite well. And the next chapter is where things are going to get truly wild, because from here, we don't know what happens. A lot of this chapter has been gap filling between moments that we were already aware of, but apart from Big Mom's interaction with Ivankov and Kuma, as well as Kuma confronting Saint Saturn, we have run out of God Valley information. Everything from here on out is going to be new, and it is going to recontextualize everything we thought we knew as the tragic tale of Rox Diesebek rapidly encroaches upon its conclusion.